But we start in Ethiopia, where after initially denying they were conducting airstrikes on Mekelle, the regional capital of Tigray, yesterday, the government later admitted they had carried out bombardments. The city is home to 500,000 residents and also hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people. And the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, accused the ENDF of hitting civilian targets. That accusation was denied by officials in Addis Ababa. But now there are reports from the town of Kombolcha, which lies 25 kilometres south of Dessie, which is on the front line, that forces loyal to the federal government are amassing. Aida Peralta is the Africa correspondent for NPR, National Public Radio in the US, and he's been telling us what's going on in Kombolcha.
We're not far from the front lines here in Kombolcha, and these Kombolcha and Dessie are extremely strategic towns in this conflict. So the rebels have been trying to take these two towns, and the government and its allied militias have been trying their hardest to keep them out. And what I've been seeing is just busloads of ENDF, Ethiopian National Defense Force, soldiers going up to the front lines to try and keep this rebel assault in check. But also we've been seeing some of the allied militias filling the backs of trucks just full of young men armed with whatever they could get their hands on, with machetes and axes and bows, and they are also headed in the direction of the front lines.
Yes, I'm just looking at your feed now, some of the videos you've been sharing. Hundreds and hundreds of young men in these large articulated lorries, and they're carrying spears, pangas and other things. How can you be sure these are forces loyal to the ANDF though?
So we are on the government side of the front lines, and I've spent the past week talking to these young men who they call themselves Fanos, or warriors, and on the Gondar side, so on the western part of this war, we spent some time with them, and essentially what they're saying is they view this as an existential fight. They believe that if the tide turns in this war, that the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, the rebels will come and kill them. The TPLF believes the same thing, right? That this is an existential fight. And so they have been picking up weapons. And what I have learned from them is that they're calling on everyone who is able-bodied to join the fight to stop this rebel advance.
In Kombolcha, you've been seeing people who've been suffering as a result of famine, and talking to people who've fled from Tigray, who fled from Mekelle. What have they been telling you?
This is the heartbreaking part of this story, is, and these are the people who are fleeing from the Amhara region, which is now being held by the TPLF rebels. So the people in Mekelle are blockaded by the government. They can't go anywhere and they can't get aid. And the UN says that they are facing famine. And the people here, there have been tens of thousands of people, local official tells us, over the past 2 weeks who have fled here to Dessie and to Kombolcha. And what they are most afraid of is that the fighting comes here and they're going to have to flee again. Some of the people I've spoken to have already fled twice. This would be their third time leaving. And one man that I spoke to, who's desperate for this war to end, told me maybe this is just the place where we all die.
Aida Peralta, the Africa correspondent for NPR, who's in the town of Kombolcha. Well, while those people in frontline areas are recounting their woes, the fear is that there will be even more casualties from not just yesterday's offensive against Mekelle, but also the fighting in Amhara region. The TPLF have been maintaining their onslaught against forces loyal to Abiy Ahmed there. So has there been more aerial bombardments today in Tigray? A question for TPLF spokesman Getachew Reda.
No, there was no airstrike today. But our counteroffensive in Amhara, in Afar, has continued.
So you have continued your counteroffensive, and looking on your Twitter feed, I understand that you say it's because of, you say when his forces are losing in battlefield, that's when he terrorizes your people. Is it because of your counteroffensive in Amhara that you believe this airstrike happened in Mekelle?
Part of their game plan to either starve our people or into submission or use whatever means at their disposal to get at our people. I mean, they have been trying through the use of force. In fact, the most recent offensive they did launch was meant to capture Tigray once again and continue their genocidal campaign against our people. Now that has proved impossible because our forces repulsed their offensive and now are in pursuit of the enemy through counter-offensive. The kind of cowardly act of sending an airplane and attacking civilian quarters, civilians who have nothing to do with what's happening on the ground in the battlefield is like I told you, mostly because they have lost in the battlefield.
We have been hearing from an eyewitness who's in the town of Kombolcha, who talks about Kombolcha and Desi, which are under ENDF control, perhaps being part of the front line, or this is where now troops are amassing, troops loyal to the ENDF. And some of these, if judging by some of the videos which are being shared, show masses of young men, some carrying pangas, cutlasses or machetes, heading towards that area. Does this worry you?
Well, it is worrisome in the sense that Abiy is trying to achieve what he has failed to achieve through tanks and howitzers and heavy artillery pieces through mobilizing unarmed, ill-equipped, ill-trained people carrying machetes. The National Army, which has deployed all the most sophisticated weaponry money can buy, hasn't achieved anything in that regard, and that they are expecting those young children carrying machetes would do the trick is worrisome because we have seen this movie several times over, and they are simply making sure that there are more casualties, civilian casualties, of course, casualties who are not carrying guns, but who will be forced into being cannon fodders. We know this is not going to achieve anything, but in the sense, it's worrisome in the sense that we are going to witness carnage of sorts, because our forces will have to defend themselves, and they have to make sure that enemy will not have the capabilities to come back and haunt our people anymore. And that we have to break the siege imposed on Tigray.
However, if I may ask you, forgive me for interrupting, but we also understand, and the accusation is that you also have young men and women working or fighting on your side that are willing to lay everything down for the TPLF, and that in fact there's heavy fighting north of Kombolcha. And according to residents there, they said there was heavy fighting close to the town yesterday and heavy gunfire and artillery. And apparently they repelled your attacks, the attacks by the TPLF.
Look, we didn't attack. We didn't launch any attack north of Kombolcha. We still are far from Kombolcha. I wouldn't be surprised if Kombolcha and the say fall in our hands coming few days, but the story, the allegation that our forces were fighting north of Kombolcha is absolutely ridiculous because it didn't happen. Yes, our forces are north of the sea, and they have been clearing the ground, and the regular ENDF units cannot even put up an effective resistance against our forces. They are retreating, and the forces are crumbling. But the response on their part is not so much to regroup their regular units, but to mobilize ill-equipped and ill-trained and unarmed civilians. As far as child soldiers are concerned, simply because an allegation is churned out again and again doesn't make it true.
And I didn't say child soldiers, I said young. I said young men and women. But if I can come back to the fighting, sir.
Yeah, we have young, fighting for the cause of Tigray.
If I can come back to the issue of the fighting, it was not in the towns of Kombolcha and Desi, but they said north of those towns is where they'd heard gunfire and heavy artillery, and this is where the attacks are said to be happening. And I just wonder, because in both these towns there are apparently tens of thousands of people who have now fled fighting over the past few months, and they are accusing both sides, and it is the civilians at the end of the day who are suffering as a result of this fighting, who are being displaced, who are now trying to look for somewhere to lay their heads and look for food. Is there no way you, as the TPLF, can come to the table, the negotiating table with Abiy Ahmed? Because both both sides have said you are willing to talk at some stage.
Yes, we have been consistent to a fault when it comes to expressing our position and our sincere commitment to resolving this conflict through dialogue. To give you an idea of what it means to deal with people like Abiy Ahmed, who has always been consistent in his genocidal demands against the people of Tigray, and he's been doing everything in his power to make sure that the people of Tigray are back under his control. And because he has failed to achieve this militarily, he is using the denial of access to humanitarian aid to cow our people into submission. And he's using starvation as a weapon. Yes, we want to address this issue peacefully, and we are willing to sit together even with people like Abiy Ahmed, who have committed genocide against our people. But it takes two to tango, as they say.
Getachew Reda, former Ethiopian minister, now a spokesman for the TPLF. You're listening to Focus on Africa on the BBC World Service. And do